Today, I want to talk about hype. There's all different kinds of hype. You can buy into hype, put stock into a professional sports organization. I'm a giant Yankees fan, and so if the Yankees go out and make a giant splash in free agency or at the trade or during the trade deadline or in the offseason, I'm going to buy into it. I'm going to get hyped because I love this team, right? I'm going to buy into this idea that we can win. You can get hyped for movies and television that you already love, that already has it, you already have that pre-existing knowledge of. For example, Mandalorian Season 3, I'm excited for it, I'm hyped for it because I love Star Wars. I've loved Star Wars my entire life. Halloween Kills, Halloween Ends, when those movies were coming out, as well as Halloween 2018. I love Halloween, and so therefore I was already hyped up for Halloween. Same thing with Evil Dead Rises. I'm hyped up for that movie, and I already know what to expect because I know the franchise. But what if you're hyped up for something you don't know anything about? Something that you don't already have a knowledge of. And that's where I want to bring in the indie horror scene. Because currently, right now, I've never seen hype in indie horror quite like I've seen it over the past couple of years. Every time something new comes out, there's always this giant hype around it. It doesn't even have to be indie horror. Let's take you back to 2009. Avatar, this movie in space about these blue people. I remember hearing about this film and people telling me, Nick, it is going to blow your mind. This is going to be absolutely your new favorite movie. And when I watched it, I liked the movie. I really love Avatar, but I was disappointed because I really thought that this movie was going to blow me away. And the visuals did blow me away, but the movie was not what I was hoping it was going to be or expecting. And so sometimes having that hype around something because people tell you about it, it really escalates your expectations for that said thing. I remember Hereditary, when Hereditary was coming out. Ari Aster, this filmmaker no one had ever heard of, he did a short film called The Strange Thing About the Johnsons. If you haven't seen it, you should definitely watch it. It's very weird. But he was this guy coming out of AFI, and you're like, okay, this guy's kind of interesting. And I remember the film came out and everyone was hailing it as the best thing since The Exorcist. It's the greatest horror film ever. And I like Hereditary. I appreciate it. I don't think it's really that. I don't really like the movie because of the hype around it. Now, I do enjoy the movie, but I don't love it like I should. And there are two movies specifically within the past couple of months that have really built up hype in the indie horror scene. The first one I've already talked about on this channel. I've reviewed it, or gave my thoughts on it, really, and that is Skinamarink, and I stand by my thoughts. I went and saw it a second time in theaters with my good friend Nathan Hale Classics, I think is his name on YouTube, I'm not sure, but you all should know Nathan Hale. I went and saw it with him, and it still floored me. It still scared the crap out of me, and it's still a movie that I love. I think it's a masterpiece, and it's one of my favorite movies of all time. I don't care what anybody thinks. I really personally resonated with that movie. And the second one is The Outwaters. This is going to be the movie that I'm going to talk a little bit about in this video. Last night, I went on Screambox, because that's where The Outwaters is. I really wanted to see this movie in theaters. I didn't get the chance to. It was never playing anywhere near me. And so I had to wait. And then it went on Screambox, and I could stream it. Now, I thought that I had a 7-day free trial for Screambox. Well, I guess I already used it at one point in time. I don't know what happened. But I subscribed to Screambox. I paid the $5 just to watch this one movie. And The Outwaters was this big hyped up horror movie that everyone's been talking about. This movie's insanely scary. It's experimental in all the best kinds of ways. And I watched it last night. I sat down, gave it a chance, and I honestly can say that the movie it's okay. It didn't get there for me. And I'll kind of get into some of the reasons why. But I'll also get into the reasons why I do like it. I think that some of the hype for it actually is deserved. So where do I sit on this movie, first and foremost? Do I hate it? Do I love it? Like I said, it is fine. It's a movie that kind of sits in the middle for me. I can respect it, and I appreciate what the filmmaker was going for. And I can appreciate the fact that they made this incredibly bonkers, bloody movie for $15,000. I am shocked because I would have thought that this thing had a budget of at least a couple $100,000, but no, it was $15,000, and they used every single cent of this money on this film, and I think they did a phenomenal job with that. And I think the production of this film is great, but the things that this movie tries to do at the end does not warrant the film. It does not help the film, in my opinion. So if you guys don't know about this movie and what the premise is, I'll kind of sum it up for you a little bit. It's about 4 friends who are in the Mojave Desert, and they are there to shoot a music video. And as they're camping in the Mojave Desert, strange phenomena starts to happen. That's really the basis for what this movie is. I can't really describe it other than that, not because of spoilers, but because this movie has a lot of symbolism. It has a lot of metaphors that I quite honestly don't really understand all of them. There are certain things happening. There are strange noises that you hear. There's strange visuals even. But the problem is you never really can kind of see these things, or really the sounds that you hear, you're not really accustomed to understanding what actually is taking place, what's going on. And Skinamarink, you can say, is very similar. Yeah, Skinamarink is an experimental film. But the thing about Skinamarink is that Skinamarink sets you up at the beginning of the movie. You know from the beginning of the movie, if you are not down for this ride, you better get off, because it's going to be that way throughout the entirety of the film. This movie starts off like the Blair Witch Projects. You get accustomed to these characters. You kind of grow to like them. You kind of get a little sense of their world, a little sense of their dreams and their passions and what they want to do. And that's like the first 45 minutes of the movie, 45, 50 minutes of the movie. And then when all the crazy stuff starts to happen, this is where things get very experimental really fast. And it doesn't work because the movie establishes this base of this is going to be kind of a common, normal found footage film, and then it goes into wacky mode and experimental mode literally throughout the second half of it. And it's really frustrating because watching this movie, I went into this not knowing anything. So I didn't know that there was going to be that switch. And I was waiting for the switch to happen where I was invested in this film of like, okay, this is the reason why. But the thing is when the experimental things start happening, you're just left with more questions than answers. And a lot of things are kind of showing up on screen at once. And some of it feels coherent to the story. And then a lot of it doesn't. And you're like, I don't really quite get what's happening here. Now, there are theories that I've seen. I have my own theories on what actually is happening. And it's not really the theorizing part that bothers me. This movie just doesn't know necessarily what it wants to be. And I feel like the best way for this filmmaker to be noticed in this movie was, hey, let's set up the premise of doing the Blair Witch, but then let's get people talking by putting in experimental horror and elevated horror concepts. And it doesn't really flow nicely. The editing in this film is just messy. They break it up with cards. So they kind of have like 3 different cards, which are basically chapters in this film. And each card is based on kind of different points in the story and following the timeline. It's a movie that I really, I was just disappointed in because I really thought, buying into this hype, that I would love this film, and I just didn't. I've left feeling kind of confused and also just really frustrated by the entire process of this movie. The movie does a lot with time. There's a lot of things happening in this film that deal with time. There's a lot of visuals on screen that you don't really know if it's just these characters are kind of hallucinating. It's very psychedelic in that way. And I do appreciate it for that. I think that they were able to really do something very cool with the blood and the gore, and being able to also showcase, something so different in the found footage genre, because found footage is very much a dull genre that just feels so repetitive by nature. But unfortunately, this film just did not live up to the hype for me. I didn't really understand, what the message of this movie was. And, there are instances where I think this film is great. And there are instances where I thought this film had potential, but there's also a lot of moments where I was just left bewildered by how messy the actual film is. It doesn't feel like a documentary. It almost feels like, even though it's found footage and it takes you through these different loops of time, it almost feels so fictional. So it does. The found footage is kind of supposed to feel real in nature, but it just did not. And the biggest problem for me is that this film's just not scary. I didn't find it scary at all. It never struck me once. There are moments where it's suspenseful, sure, but then it cuts to something that just takes the suspense right away. It just rips it right off. It rips it right away from you, and that was very unfortunate because I really wanted to continue to escalate. It's almost like this movie is a lot of build-up and build-up and build-up, but no payoff. There's very little payoff in this film. But I do think that if you go into this movie understanding that the second half of it is going to be experimental and very in your face about metaphors, then I think you will enjoy it. But I just personally, it wasn't for me. And so hype is really weird for me this year because Skinamarink had all the hype of being the scariest film ever on TikTok, and I bought into that hype. I believe it. I love Skinamarink. That movie scares the crap out of me. I think it's a masterpiece. And The Outwaters, as much as I really wanted to love it and I really gave it a chance, it just did not live up to the hype, and it did not live up to the expectations that I guess that I already set. That this movie was going to be something that I really adored and I loved, but it's not there for me. And maybe it will get there. And maybe I just need to take some time, maybe take a few weeks, reinvest time into this film, watch it again. I do want to rewatch it and see, maybe now knowing what the film is, if I can just take it in, swallow it, and digest it a little bit. If I can actually understand what they're trying to say with this movie, if I can actually get past the point of where this movie becomes completely bonkers and chaotic, I think then maybe this film could start kind of getting on a better path for me in terms of me appreciating and loving this film. But unfortunately, it's just not there for me. I applaud the filmmakers, though. They did an incredible job with the blood. They did an incredible job with, throwing stuff at the wall. They really did a lot of different things here that I commend them for. I just really wish the payoff was better. And it's unfortunate because, even though Skinamarink, you can't really see what's going on, you at least get a full picture. I mean, this movie, there's a lot of moments where it's one little tiny circle of a flashlight on something that's 30 yards away. And it's just really frustrating. It's really irritating, and you just hear a lot of sounds. And the sound design is incredible, by the way. The sound design is incredible in this movie, but it didn't do anything for me, unfortunately. And so, hype. Don't buy into the hype always. At the end of the day, just temper your expectations.